Hi, I'm Shoma Chaudhary. Thank you for watching Inquiry. This entire week, there's been white hot focus on the escalated situation between India and China. The brutal face off between Chinese and Indian soldiers on 15th of June, the intrusion of Chinese troops into Pangong Tso area and Galwan Valley, and Prime Minister Modi's statement to an all party meeting on national television have all raised many questions and controversies. While India stands in solidarity, there are uncomfortable questions that need answering. What has triggered this recent aggression by China in a pincer move in several territories of India? Was there a gap between the Prime Minister's statement and the situation on ground? What is the path ahead for India and what will be the consequences? To discuss all of that, I have a very experienced and respected guest at Inquiry today, Lieutenant General D.S. Huda. He's been the former chief of the Northern Command. He's well versed with Pakistan and China, and he's also the general who oversaw and was the architect of the surgical strikes after the Uri terror attack. Thank you very much for joining me in Inquiry, General Huda.
Pleasure, Shoma.
So I just wanted to start with the fact that you were the chief of the Northern Command. You oversaw the surgical strike. You really know the topography of both Pakistan and China. Assessing the situation that India finds itself in today, so what would you say?
So, Shoma, the short answer is the situation is extremely grave. And I say this because, one, it's completely different from past incidents like Chumar and Depsang and Doklam, which were very localized incidents. So the situation actually was grave, from the first week of May onwards. Because even at that time, if you recall, there was a great deal of violence which accompanied Chinese attempts at intrusion into our area. We heard about 70, 75 soldiers getting injured. We have a commanding officer who's in hospital. And then you have this incident of 15 June, 20 soldiers martyred. We've never had these kind of incidents. I think there is no other way to say it. I think the Chinese have come, utilized the military option as the first option. We didn't hear any diplomatic, sort of complaints from their side that there were some problems. So they've come in large military numbers and forcibly changed the alignment of the LAC. I mean, there's no other way to say it. So I think this is going to be something that possibly we could see also going ahead in the future, and something that we need to watch out and make sure that our military capability has the ability to respond to this.
So this is, several commentators have spoken of this as Mr. Modi's Nehru moment, that it's a real moment of reckoning. So do you agree?
To me, this is a watershed moment in India-China relations. And I think we have to decide from here on, what is going to be the quality of our relations with China. Will our appeasement policy work with China? I think it won't. It's well known through history that, an appeasement policy has never brought peace to the appeaser. And just to, paraphrase Churchill's words, that you can keep feeding a crocodile in the hope that it will eat you last, but the fact is it will eat you. And therefore, I think we need to be very, very serious about what is the nature of our relations going forward with China.
Little did we know the good times come and go, but the best is yet to come.
So when we were chatting earlier, you had said that this is unprecedented. So if you were in command, sir, right now in that region, what is the advice that you would be giving government?
Before I give the answer, let me tell you that, there are very experienced officers currently in command. So we have Jen Joshi, who's the army commander, was a brigade commander at Ladakh, at GOC, and his last appointment was the corps commander at Ladakh, where all this is going on. My advice would be, we have to militarily stand firm and send out a strong message to China that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, and that our bottom line is that the status quo ante has to be restored. The positions that existed as of, let's say, April of this year, the Chinese must go back to their positions. But realistically speaking, is it something that's going to easily happen? I don't think so. The way they've come in, the preparations with which they have come in, the numbers, the activities that they're doing, they're just digging in, making new positions at various areas. I think it's not going to be easy.
So you've said two things. One is that they have intruded when the Prime Minister addressed the all-party meeting and on national TV. He said that there's been no intrusion, no patrol point of ours is in their possession, and this triggered quite a bit of controversy because it seemed to contradict what the Defence Minister and the Foreign Minister themselves had said. So, what would be your assessment of the Prime Minister's statement as well as the ground situation? In terms of possession of what India considers its territory?
So, Shoma, you're aware, the Prime Minister's comments created and generated a lot of controversy. And since then, there has been some clarification that the Prime Minister actually meant no Chinese presence on our side in the Galwan Valley and not in the other areas. But with my own knowledge of the ground that is there and coming specifically to two areas where I think there is a problem, just let me talk about that. The first is Galwan Valley. And what appears to have happened there is that the Chinese were attempting to put some observation post or something on our side of the LAC, although not by much. And there we had this, very brutal and tragic incident on 15th of June. It appears now that the Chinese have gone back to their own side of the LAC. Pengongso is a different picture because here the Chinese have certainly come across our perception of the LAC, come at least 5 to 6 kilometers inside, and have dug in and prepared positions. The latest satellite imagery shows maybe more than 50 positions have been created in this area. Now, Shoma, we could say, there was always differing perceptions in this area. The Chinese had one perception and we had one perception. And therefore, this is like some gray disputed zone. But the fact is, we have our perception of the LAC. In my maps, in my headquarters, we had one line marked. And for us, if the Chinese overstepped that line and came on our side, they were in our territory.
So yesterday, even a lot of media reports have reported about Pangong, the fact that there is possession and intrusion in that region. And in fact, the Times of India carried a front page story where a serving army officer on anonymity described the amount of intrusion and said that it would be very tough to actually make the Chinese let go of these positions. So when you're saying that you would have advised a strong military message at this juncture, what actually very bluntly is possible for India to do in terms of conventional strength? Do we have the strength to take on China? And when you say that there should be a military message, what do you really mean by that?
So I'm not saying military message. I'm saying firmness in our stance, politically, diplomatically, and just our military posture that needs to be shown to the Chinese. The build-up that we need to do. One is to discourage them from taking any further action. Now suddenly we hear that they are sort of laying claim to the whole Galwan Valley. So we need to make sure that they don't come in and intrude in further areas. As regards what can we do at Pengongso, Shoma, the ideal would be that diplomatically these things are resolved and sorted out, and the Chinese agree to accept status quo ante. It's going to be difficult. It doesn't appear that they're going to go back, at least in a hurry or in the short term. Do we have some military options? Yes, we do, and some of them can be exercised. See, the Chinese have initiated a military action, and from our side to say that we are completely ruling out the military option would be wrong, because then it will severely restrict choices that are there with the government. If the government is going to say no, we will only do diplomatic, engagement and nothing else, then your options are limited. So I think we should keep the military options on the table.
So, sir, in terms of just strength, the question that I asked you, again, I'd reiterate that you led the surgical strikes into Pakistan. We've had several face-offs with Pakistan, but since 62, there's been no conventional, conflict situation with China in that sense. So, what are India's strengths and what are things to watch out for?
Okay, Shoma. So actually, if you look on paper, you would probably think that the Chinese military completely outmatches India. Their defense budget is 4 times our size. If you look at the numbers of hardware in terms of say tanks and aircraft, submarines, they easily the numbers are much more than what we have. But I think there is also a geographical reality, and that is launching major attacks across the Himalayan watershed is just not the easiest thing anybody can do. The logistics that are required, the number of troops that you can actually put in place to launch the attack, and our defenses on the Himalayan watershed are pretty strong. Coming to the Air Force, we have an edge because the Chinese will be forced to operate from Tibetan high altitude airfields. And so the loads with which they can take off, the fuel, the weapon loads are restricted. And we have a tremendous advantage in the Indian Ocean with our presence. And for the Chinese Navy to come in big numbers, they would have to come from South China Sea, transit through very narrow straits, the Malacca Straits, to get into the Indian Ocean, over which we can always keep surveillance. So if it comes to a conflict, it is not as if the Chinese with their superior forces will be able to completely overwhelm the Indian military. So I think we have advantages in some areas, and that is why I said the government should not feel that use of military power is something that will be a huge disadvantage to us.
So, sir, are enough signals being sent out by the government? I mean, I'm a die-hard peacenik and absolutely not a warmonger. But over the last few days, there has been orders given out that soldiers can use firearms on the border in extraordinary circumstances. And there's been a kind of build-up of armament on the border, a kind of show of strength facing China. Do you think that these are important signals, and is it enough?
So, Shoma, you're not the only pacifist. As they say, in a democracy, the generals are the most peaceful of people. And that's because we've seen, what horrors conflict can bring. But we need to show signals. I think the government is going on the right line. We are building up to make sure that we are in a position to handle any contingency that happens. We are building up to make sure that, this problem doesn't spread in other areas, because if it does spread in other areas, you are going to find it extremely difficult to, even sit at the table and talk to each other.
So, sir, just like the Prime Minister's statement to the all-party meeting created a lot of controversy, there's also been a lot of debate over whether our soldiers were not carrying firearms at all, or whether they were observing protocols that have been set by the 1996 and 2005 treaty, which prohibit them from using firearms on the border. So again, sir, you've been on the ground, you've been a chief of the Northern Command and a commanding officer. If you were there in that situation, what is the order that you would have given? And given the psyche of soldiers, is it normal that there would be a protracted battle over many hours where they would see a commanding officer and their fellow soldiers be killed, and over several hours they would not draw arms because they're observing protocol? How is one to read that entire situation, sir?
Shoma, one, of course, is that we don't know exactly what happened. So initially there were some reports that soldiers were unarmed, and the foreign minister said no, they were carrying arms but observing protocols. Now, as far as the protocols are concerned, yes, we have a protocol. Those protocols are meant for border management. They are meant for routine activities when patrols meet each other. And then, we don't want situation escalating. And therefore, we say don't use firearms. These protocols are not for emergency situations where soldiers are getting brutally killed, by the enemy. In such circumstances, these protocols are just not applicable. It is, in fact, the duty of every leader in the military and every soldier to protect men who are under his command and to protect the lives of their comrades. And therefore, I think if they were carrying weapons and if I was in their place, uh, I think there wouldn't have been any restrictions.
So another uncomfortable question that arises, sir, is that how has there been such a large build-up? Almost 50 fortifications one hears that, and an Air Force strip. How has all of that happened without our knowledge? To put it very bluntly, sir, has there been a big intelligence failure? And in the 21st century, with all the technology available, now one is seeing satellite images. Is it possible that there could be so much movement without one's knowledge? Or is it that, one was absolutely caught napping?
So, Shoma, to put it bluntly, uh, we were surprised. At least the troops on ground were surprised. I think once the crisis is over, we need to have something like a Kargil review committee to go into all aspects of what happened and what is it that we can do better. We have good intelligence assets as far as the Pakistan border is concerned. That same quality and level of assets are not available across the LAC, and therefore that's an area that we need to look at.
So forgive me, sir, if this is a very naive question, and I'm just asking it actually from not a position of knowledge, but it just seems very difficult to understand this because there are Google Maps, even civilians like us can access these maps, and the entire world is under a kind of Google binocular. You can zero in into spaces and see things in very minute detail. So even through just that kind of mapping, was it not possible to know about this build-up over several months?
So yeah, I also use Google Earth, and as you said, yeah, the whole world is under the Google scanner. But if you actually look at the imagery that is out on Google Earth, you will probably find it's vintage. I mean, when I was looking at the areas of Galwan, Pengong, so it's 2017, 2018 imagery. So it's not, as we say, live shots that are being constantly updated. What you require for, a live information is satellites which are up in the sky and who are look constantly looking at these areas. Now that kind of constellation of satellites, of observation satellites, not something that is available currently with India. And therefore, as the satellites pass, they'll only be able to do one small area with one sweep. So there are restrictions and limitations that we have. You could say, why don't you put some, optical unmanned devices along the border? And again, there are just physical challenges. So I remember we tried to put up some cameras, long range optical cameras, but when the temperature goes to -20, -30, the battery runs out in 2 hours, and so there are challenges. But yes, we do need much better surveillance. We do need much better intelligence of what is happening across the LAC, and that is something that I think the government must immediately look into.
So a couple of years ago, you put out a national security strategy report, which was really looking at global dynamics, India's relations with its neighbors, the military strength that was needed. Did you foresee this intensification of Chinese aggression towards India? I mean, this time it doesn't just seem like the older border skirmishes that we've had in the past with Chumar and Doklam and other incidents. This time there's a sense of like a pincer movement of being surrounded. There's China's intense economic interests in Pakistan, strategic and economic, through the economic corridor. There's the Nepal issue where Nepal has changed its map and we don't seem to have been able to do anything about it. There's China's presence in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, Bhutan, the South China Sea. So there's really a sense of being surrounded. Did you foresee this, and what were the strategies that you had suggested?
So, Shoma, in that national security strategy report that I prepared, I had said that we are going to be seeing a period of strategic rivalry between India and China. It's also a geopolitical illusion that two neighboring countries can rise peacefully. It has never happened in history. And therefore, China is going to make attempts to keep India down and maintain its regional dominance, at least in Asia to start with. And therefore, this rivalry is going to be there. Uh, how this rivalry has suddenly unfolded in this time, I think a lot of it is the coronavirus and this pandemic trigger, which has actually intensified rivalries all around the world. I think we are going to see more assertive behavior by China in future. It's already happening in the South China Sea. You're seeing it in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Australia. So this intensification is going to take place. And as part of their efforts uh, to get regional hegemony, China is going to try and take advantage of all our differences with our neighbors. With Pakistan, it was already there. I mean, they've helped them in any number of ways: military technology, nuclear technology. Uh, they support them, in international forums.
But so, what is China really achieving by doing what it's done right now? Strategically, is Pangong of what they have done in Pangong, is that very threatening for India? Because in the past, when the Chamar, Doklam, all of that happened, there was a face-off, and then they kind of retreated. Of course, later I believe they did finish building the road that they wanted to. But what exactly is this game? Are they trying to provoke a full-on conflict, or what are they achieving by what they're doing right now?
I think, Shoma, this is not so much about territories as about the message that they're sending out. Uh, that one, we can settle our border disagreements forcefully and on our terms. And a message to India that we will use the military option and therefore remain in your place. We are a much more powerful country. I think that's the kind of messaging that is going out.
So, sir, just on the issue of being caught napping, are there other aspects of Chinese strategy that we are being blind to? For instance, on cyber war or on any aspects that we are not really prepared for? Perhaps we're missing signals.
Oh yes, Shoma, if you actually look at the way the Chinese restructuring, reform, and modernization is taking place, they've also raised what they call a strategic support force. And that strategic support force brings together information, electronic warfare, cyber, and space. And if you look at how the Chinese describe future warfare, they talk about information warfare as an extremely important component. We are extremely vulnerable on two fronts, if I may say. One is cyber, because the kind of Chinese technology that we have adopted into some of our critical infrastructure networks is extremely, extremely vulnerable. So look at telecommunications, for example. BSNL, almost more than 50 to 60% of the hardware is Chinese. You have Chinese into our power industry. And therefore, the ability to interfere with the power sector, shutting down power plants, for example. I was seeing the other day there was some contract which probably has not been given now for railway signaling equipment. Now, just imagine if there is a cyber attack on your railway signaling equipment. I mean, the kind of chaos that it can create. So that's one area I think we need to take a hard look at, making sure we have indigenous technology in our critical infrastructure. And the second area, Shoma, is information warfare. The Chinese are past masters at this. They will utilize all kinds of means to sow divisions in society, to sharpen differences that we have, And this is something that we don't talk so much about, but it's out there in India.
So what are the options if you were, advising government right now? What would be the strategies that you would suggest?
I think just from a security perspective, I don't think we should be too concerned because I think military capability has got built up in these areas. I think if I was to prepare a report, I would probably be looking at the future and saying how we should, prevent these incidents from happening. The power differential between China and India is going to grow. It is not going to narrow down in the future. And therefore, our hopes of maintaining some kind of a balance, maintaining impartiality, strategic neutrality, I think is not going to work. It was possible to do it, Shoma, during the US, Russia, Soviet Union Cold War, because both these were countries very far away from our borders. Now you have a rising power on our border, and we have disagreements, with China. Our border is not settled, and therefore, I think for us to try and remain neutral is going to be difficult. Uh, Therefore, we will have to, I think, get together a coalition of like-minded partners, whether it is some sort of accord, whether it is with the ASEAN countries who have problems with China, is it some strategic alignment with the United States, which itself is in a huge security competition with China. We'll have to, now start taking some tough decisions. Now, it could well happen that China is upset with this, and we have a little more trouble along the borders with them. That's a risk I think we'll have to accept. Otherwise, I think the power differential will become so much that even in Asia, you could well end up losing much of your relevance.
Yeah, because we haven't been able to do much with, even with Nepal, in a way, cocking its snook at India, and there hasn't been any real pushback. And so there is a sense of India being quite cornered at this moment. But generally, even aligning with America brings its own troubles, because that kind of draws you into their turmoils, which have been engendered. So, for instance, in Afghanistan, India has managed to have cordial relations, and despite there being a boiling pot next to us, none of those issues of extreme radicalization or the Taliban or any of those messes have not spilled into India. But if we were to grow very clearly proximate with America, would we not be entering all those issues in the Middle East and elsewhere as well?
So, Shoma, when I'm saying, we need to come to some sort of strategic understanding with America, it doesn't mean, we are going to start participating in their wars and put boots on ground, say in Afghanistan or even in the Middle East. I think there are areas of common strategic understanding. The Indo-Pacific region, for example, both the countries are today looking at a rising China, and both in some ways are threatened by the rise of China. Can we come to an understanding of how to deal with this with the US? I think there is a huge potential as far as the military technology and the arms inductions are concerned. We might just want to say that we'll become Atmanirbhar, but I don't see us reaching that even in the next 20 to 30 years. So can we take advantage of the US defense industry to build up our capabilities?
Very often there's a kind of almost chest thumping nationalism, jingoism that kicks in whenever there's a conflict situation with Pakistan. We aren't seeing exactly that same language where China is concerned. So you've really manned both borders. What are the differing challenges between dealing with Pakistan and dealing with China for the army?
See, a lot of us in the army have been saying for many years that in terms of military, Pakistan is really not a great military challenge to India, both in terms of its economic potential and the military potential, and that we need to keep our eye on China. Uh, since 2005 or 6, I think there has been some realization, and therefore infrastructure improvement, some additional raisings, have taken place as far as our capability against China is concerned. But somehow, politically and emotionally, we are too tied into into Pakistan. So too much of our attention actually goes towards the Pakistan military. We just kept our eye too much on Pakistan.
So, sir, do you have a sense of what triggered this? You said one is the coronavirus situation, but there's also been some talk of whether, the muscle flexing that the Home Minister did on POK and Aksai Chin may have triggered a response from China, because they do have, as we were talking earlier about, very, very intense economic investment in Pakistan in that area with the CPEC. So, with the Kashmir situation as well, has that had any repercussions in your assessment?
So, Shoma, there are a lot of assessments about why China has done this, ranging from their own internal problems to the kind of criticism that they've been facing externally. And one, of course, would be the decision taken, on August 5th. I think we could have been a little more calibrated and careful in the statements that we made after that, because the Home Minister said that, this whole Aksai Chin is ours and it belongs to us. And even at that time, the Chinese had protested, and the foreign minister did try and, soothe the feathers a bit. Even now, you've seen the statement given by the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan, in which he said some of the trigger of this is due to what happened on 5th August. So we can't be 100% sure, but certainly all these things have have an effect. And I think our political leadership, when they're making statements, they should look not only at the sort of domestic constituency, but also look at what impact our remarks are going to have, as far as our external relations are concerned.
So, sir, what is your assessment of the government's move on Kashmir? Has that really brought it under control, as the government says, that the issue has been sorted? Or do you see it potentially as being quite a big security problem for India in the time ahead?
So, Shoma, if you look at it purely from a very narrow security perspective, you could say the situation is under control, because in the last 4-5 years, the overall strength of terrorists in Kashmir Valley has remained around 200 to 300 terrorists. So it's not such a large number that cannot be handled, by the security forces. If you look at whether this is going to lead to conflict resolution in Kashmir, I think that's where we need to start looking at other factors. Certainly, the move on 5th August has led to alienation, anger among the people, particularly among the youth. There has been very little outreach, that we see by the government in order to address these issues. There is talk about increasing radicalization that is happening. The much promised development actually hasn't taken place. I think the shutdown of the internet, yes, you could say helped security, but I think it was also something that further exacerbated, the frustration among the people. So these are big challenges. I always like to say that it's easier to kill terrorists, much more difficult to kill terrorism. And unfortunately, we have been so focused on killing terrorists and talking about 150 killed this year and 200 killed that year, celebrating each of these now. These are good successes. But I think the larger issue of what gives rise to terrorism in Kashmir and how do we address that, that somehow hasn't got the attention that it deserves.
And so in any conflict situation that arises around, either with Pakistan or with China, with the kind of concentration of troops that we have in Kashmir, would that itself pose a problem for the fact that to keep Kashmir and its resentments in control, now one has taken a purely security approach? Would that become a problem if any conventional conflict or war were to arise?
So as of now, if you look at, say, for example, the situation in Ladakh, and how it could also develop. I'm not saying into an all-out conflict, but say maybe there is a requirement of a few more soldiers on ground there. I think there are sufficient troops available in the Leh Corps, the 14 Corps, which is there. There are sufficient reserves available with the Northern Command to be sent to Leh, Ladakh in case of an emergency. I don't see at this situation any requirement to pull out troops from counterinsurgency or counter-terrorist duties in Kashmir, and therefore, a weakening of, say, the grid there. I don't see that requirement today. So I think you will continue to see the kind of presence of troops in Kashmir Valley as we are seeing today. If an all-out conflict, breaks out, obviously, then troops will get pulled out, because then your priority will go to the borders and not to operations in the valley.
So, sir, a lot of the resolving of the matter right now has been left to military level conversations. Do you think that that's the right tactic, and what would you suggest?
My feeling is there are limitations to military contacts, and particularly in situations like this, because when you have two armies facing off each other, and when you have territories in question, then I don't see military officers stepping back. And then when you had violence which has accompanied this, and you lost, a commanding officer, and there is talk there was also a commanding officer lost on the Chinese side, then tempers sort of run high. So I think what the military talks can achieve is to ensure that there is de-escalation, that troops don't resort to violence on both sides. I think the main focus of our talks now should be at the diplomatic level. I think they've given too much attention to military engagement in the last 1.5 months. At some high level in diplomacy, they should sit and decide, and then tell the generals on ground, this is what we have decided, and this should be your de-escalation or disengagement process.
So, sir, earlier when we were saying that this is being framed as Mr. Modi's Nehru moment, what is it that you would suggest should absolutely not be done?
Absolutely not be done.
Yes, sir.
I think absolutely not be done is that we shouldn't, back down and accept that, yes, China is a much superior power, and therefore our options are very limited in this space. I think let's look at it holistically, if not in the short term, at least from a long-term perspective of how we can utilize our, politics, diplomacy, economy, military, to be able to find some solution.
So that's not an answer. That's not an answer at all, sir.
So I don't know what I don't know.
From such a and especially someone who's considered a hero of the nation, the commander of the surgical strikes. That's not an answer, sir.
What should Modi not do?
Mm-hmm.
I think, Shoma, that's what I said. I think he shouldn't back down at this stage.
So to end on just one positive note, what is the key strength that you feel India has?
I think our democracy itself is one strength, and how other countries, look up to us. Everybody, at least in our region, in Asia, even say Australia, New Zealand, and in those areas, looks up to India as something that can stand up to what was looking to be greater Chinese assertiveness and aggression. And so they look at one challenger to China in Asia, and that challenger is India. And that's why I think we need to keep our reputation intact. If we even, appear to have backed off what is, I would say, legitimate Chinese demand, then it could seriously affect our reputation in the region.
So there's a very worrying end to that assertion. One understands what you're saying, that there's no way that India should or look as if it's backing down in the face of the kind of, unprovoked action from the Chinese side. But if the logical end of that is a escalated war-like situation or a conflict, is that at all something that India can afford and not come away with a bloodied nose?
Yeah, Shoma, but it's also a counter question is, can China afford it? So are they going to indulge in such behavior that they continue to escalate and continue to escalate, and it leads to an all-out war between India and China? And let me tell you, they are not going to escape completely untouched with whatever conflict that takes place. So this is something that even China needs to look at. Are they biting off more than they can chew? So it's not only that India will be at some kind of risk, so will China be.
Thank you very, very much, General Huda. Thank you for making the time.